We might get started again. This next session is a description of some existing projects, admittedly in some different environments. But I hope that you will have a whole lot to take away, a whole lot of examples from some terrific project leaders sitting up on the stage today. My name's John Turner. I run for my sins XBRL International, which is the alphabet and grammar, if you like, of the XBRL standard. We provide the specifications. Shops like the FASB and the GASB and the IFRS Foundation and the SEC create dictionaries or taxonomies. So they create the words. Those words have got to be using the alphabet and grammar. And of course, to create reports, you've got to use words that are in the dictionaries and you've got to use the alphabet and grammar. There you are. Now you know all you need to know about XBRL. There are 220 mandatory implementations of the XBRL standard around the world, covering everything from municipal disclosures in places like Spain through to private company disclosures in enormous numbers of countries. Where I'm based in the UK, for example, just on 3 million companies every year, that's the most simple business in the land, which is a plumber that happens to have a limited liability company, through to the largest companies in the land, all produce inline XBRL documents. They've been doing it for 11 years. It just works. I was listening with great interest to the concern about change that was expressed this morning. And I'd just like to reassure you that America's a big place, but it's not the only place in the world. Most of these problems have been solved in many other places already. And there's a huge ecosystem which you can rely on. And you get to add to that ecosystem because these are open, non-proprietary standards, which, as Campbell described, get modified as technology changes. So we started out as XML. These days we tend to use JSON and CSV. When something else is coming along, we'll be using that as well. But the standard is a global public interest activity that is focused on improving the accountability and transparency of business performance and thereby improve business performance. And that should work at every level and have all the impacts that you've heard from the speakers this morning. I'm delighted to be joined by 3 leaders in this space in the US federal government. So we've got Rob Hudson from FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. We've got Julie Marlowe from the SEC. And we've got Mark Montoya. And Mark and I have been knocking around in this area for 20 years now, so we're really old.
We are.
But Mark's from the FDIC, and all of the bank data has been collected in XBRL since 2005. So, you know, this is old, this stuff. It just works. We're going to have 3 brief presentations from each of our speakers. I've not done them the service of reading out their extensive CVs because you have it all written down. I would like you to hear from our speakers and then for us to have some time for questions. So, Rob, please jump in. I think that you've got the clicker and I believe it works.
All right, I'm going to start my timer here because I never know how long I go and I've asked to only speak to 15 minutes. My name is Rob Hudson. I work at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission as John was saying. Can you all hear me well? Should I? Okay. We implemented a project, started in 2015. Oh, sorry. I have to do the usual federal government disclaimer. The views expressed in this presentation, you can read it on the screen. They're my own, not any of the commissioner or commissioner's assistants or anybody at the commission. So we have a project that's in publication right now called the e-form system. It's a collection of 10 forms and subforms of electric, gas, and oil pipelines, financial and operational data. We're collecting them annually and quarterly, and we have, when I say subforms, we have forms for large filers and forms for small filers that are collected on other bases. We implemented a taxonomy for each one of those forms for each one of the industries, and it's pretty big. It's about 10,000 elements. We're only in year 3 of really collecting them, and it's going well. They asked me to talk about lessons learned, so I'm going to talk about my experience in this project, what we did, what pitfalls there are, and things like that. The first thing was I got to FERC in 2014 and was given this project. I don't think anyone at the agency, and this is for any other government people, understood how big of a project these type of things can be. In addition to what I was hired to do, which is electricity and energy analysis, I was helped building a new data system. I need to speak up. And it kind of consumed everything for several years. And so there's something to be said for planning for FTEs on a big project like this, planning for the time and definitely the resources and the money, but it's a lot about the project and the person who's running it. So move on to, so everybody knows what the motivation is. You all know these reasons. This is why we adopted it. But a lot of ours was based on the success of the SEC's, my colleagues at the SEC and the FDIC and other XBRL implementations. We pointed our burden directly to some numbers in the SEC's filings, and it really helped us really sell it within the agency to be able to do it. So we're just going to bust right through to some of the challenges. So our first challenge, there's a large interest in electricity in the United States and natural gas and oil. And there are many different associations we had to work with. We had a several years lead up time to talking with each one of these associations, explaining to them XBRL, what this would be. And also, I think we passed the hurdle of but at the time it was, no, XBRL doesn't collect just financial data. It's not just, profit and sales. It can be whatever you define it to be. And that was a big hurdle, at least at the time, that we were going to be developing our own elements and the things like that. As I mentioned before, the complexity of these forms, each form is probably, if you print it out in blank pages, 70 pages. And it includes time series data. It also includes just, regular monthly data and things like that. It's about 10,000 elements that we had to define. And someone mentioned to me earlier today that they were surprised and I guess it was refreshing to see we use a lot of the metadata. We created labels upon labels upon labels to describe our data. So it is helpful for vendors, for filers, for regular analysis, so people understand if they just pull in the taxonomy, it's all right there for them to already see. You don't have to have a data dictionary. It's built into our thing. Another big complexity was that FERC is one of those agencies that is transitioning more towards data and historically been with lawyers. And so people are used to seeing printed out forms. We had to develop that. So every instance that we receive, we create the human readable form for it. And some of these can be over 400 pages long. And that is a big complexity to our system that sometime in the future, we may move to an inline XBRL thing like the SEC has for some of its collections. But right now we are printing a human readable form so people can see it on a website, on a web page. We were also collecting from Visual Fox Pro, if anyone is old enough to remember programming in Visual Fox Pro. That's what we had before, and they were a mess, to be honest with you. Columns were as rows in some of the tables. They weren't clearly defined. It took a long time for us to understand how to create a taxonomy from that. And then we converted 10 years worth of data. So people could have all of that at their fingertips immediately. And that we're still working out some of the bugs in it. But it was a very good thing to do at first. Let's get on to the marketplace of filing solutions. We have a different model than the FDIC about who can file our forms. Anybody can be a vendor and file forms with FERC for these things. We had to understand at the time small filers and large filers, and we have another implementation of XBRL that's coming that is going to have an even more disparity between those things that I'll talk at the end of the slides. And understanding that some filers don't want to spend $20,000 a year to buy software to do this, and there needs to be other solutions. That's something that's really necessary in the beginning for you to for anyone who's taking on this project, is who's going to be filing it and how much that software might be, and if you want to develop solutions for it. We also publish everything externally in an RSS feed. We just think that's very helpful. I think the SEC also does that on many, if not all of its things. We publish the instance files as we get them. We do not have yet a public-facing data portal, but we're working on it. It's coming. Our DGD group is in the process of figuring that out. Data governance division is in the process of figuring out what they want to do with that, to let the public, let anyone slice and dice these collections, then all of FERC's collections. These are pretty simple stuff, the benefits. One of the biggest problems was, I already turned the page, was our, sorry, I got a little mixed up. We converted from Visual Fox Pro, machine readable RSS. That was from this page. So we'll go on to lessons learned. This is the crux of things, and I want to explain these pretty clearly. So the concrete business rules were very challenging at first. We had a very high level of validation rules that we built on it. We wrote them in Zool, and they are in a separate engine. We also publish all of our code for our system internally. You can download everything that we use. It can be downloaded. We think that's very helpful. But moving from a VFP environment where things were a lot looser and getting into more of a very structured validation framework was difficult because our filers had different interpretations of the rules. We had to really concentrate on answering a lot of questions in the beginning as to why we chose this way, because you don't know what they're thinking until they start filing and they see that they can't put a negative number in this liabilities column anymore and things like that. Robust training is very important internally, especially. So one of our things that we can do better the next time is assess internally how our current users of the data, the tools that they need and the connections that they need to the database, what kind of compliance programs that they need, and have them ready on day one. There's also, in any government institution, there's always the challenge of who's willing and who's able to understand a new system. And what kind of training will you do ahead of time to make sure those people are able to start once you convert everything and get into the new system, are able to continue their regular work processes on the new database. There's always improvements that I know that every agency can do, and I know that we plan to do in our next collection in addressing those needs. So future plans. This is we've implemented an annual update cycle. We update our taxonomies about this time every year. We publish a taxonomy, the rules, the codes, and everything to our website, which is ecollection.ferc.gov. It's slowly going to be turned into the collection portal for all of FERC's forms. And we collect comments or suggestions directly to the code, and we put things out in, I think we're asking for comments to be in around the end of February, so we can get them out for a Q1 implementation. We also published recently an update, a major update to our forms. I believe it's Form 1, which is the electric form, and it takes into account things that just weren't included in the past VFP form, a lot of renewable energy assets that are new, and those will be wrapped up into one of our next update cycles. The last thing I want to talk about is a new project that a lot of my colleagues are here about too. We are upgrading a large collection of ours into XBRL CSV, which is, I think will be one, if not the first federal agency to adopt XBRL CSV if we can get through the final rule. It's It's a collection of electric sales data for every sale across the country that filers report to us. And this is where we have to really gauge, because there's a farmer with a wind turbine on his farm that has to submit this data. And then there's also Exelon and other multi-billion-dollar companies that won't bat an eye at just adding on more software because they're already filing SEC data with some vendor. And so assessing the needs of the filers at that point is very important to FERC and any collection that you're going to do. I have a lot more detailed information, but I think that's it, and I would rather have just more time for comments. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Rob. Do you want to jump in, Julie? I'm going to swap your slides over for you.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Great. I can just get started with the quick intro. Before I do get into our presentation, I do want to thank our staff, our team members who are here, and also the other SEC staff who work on data efforts. What I'm presenting today is based on their hard work, and I would like to thank them for their dedication and commitment to public service. There we go. Just like Rob, I'll start with the disclaimer. Today's presentation is provided in my official capacity as the Assistant Director of the Office of Structured Disclosure at the SEC. Does not reflect the views of the Commission, Commissioners, or other members of the staff. Today, I will go over SEC's Structured Data Program, along with FDTA that I know you heard earlier. So I'll just focus on the sections that are relevant to us, some EDGAR checks related to data quality, and some of the observations and guidance that we published on our website, and end with financial statements and notes data set. Let's back up a little bit and start with what our office does. I think a lot of SEC staff outside of SEC folks know what CorFin does or enforcement does. We are part of Division of Economic and Risk Analysis. So as you can see from the name, we have economists who work on rulemaking. We also participate in rulemaking if the rule covers structured data. But part of DIRA, our division, also covers the data side, and we're part of that side. So we work on, in summary, making the data accessible and easy to use. We also design applications for our staff's use. And we collect data and publish data sets, open and free, on our website. And as I'm doing now, we engage with market participants. So we meet with FASB, Louis is here today, ISB, accounting standard bodies, and XBRL US. We meet with them periodically to hear what are they working on for their data quality evaluation rules that filers can use and check before they submit the filings to us. Let's do a quick history lesson. We started in 2005 with a volunteer program allowing the operating companies and later mutual funds to give us XBRL data for financial statements and notes voluntarily. In 2009, we did adopt interactive data rules for the filers to structure financial statements and notes data with a 3-year implementation based on the filer size. So the larger filers went first. 2017, we finally had the IFRS taxonomy. That means the foreign private issuers that file their financial statements in accordance with the international financial reporting standards have to give us their structured financial statements notes data with the IFRS taxonomy. 2018 was a big year for us. We have inline XBRL, again, with a 3-year implementation. I think all of you are aware of what inline XBRL is, but just a quick summary. It combines the XBRL data with the HTML view, right? So when you hover over the data, the tag data, you get the metadata, meaning accounting codifications. What is this tag related to? What requirement is this related to? Debit, credit. What scaling is it in? So it's very easy for users to detect data quality errors. Since then, we've had numerous rules with structured data requirements, as some of you may be feeling it as well as either tagging vendors or filers, and we're definitely feeling the kind of the wave as well. It's good. It's an exciting time, and stay tuned for more rules to follow. So let's dive into a few examples of those rules. Let's start with cybersecurity. We adopted this rule in July 2023. It requires the filers to tell us about their material cybersecurity incidents. They also have to discuss what their processes are over assessing and identifying those security risks, along with management's role and board of directors oversight. It does require inline XBRL, block tag for narrative, detailed tag for quantitative disclosures. Second rule, insider trading, adopted in December 2022, requires filers to tell us about their policies and procedures over insider trading. Again, detailed tag for quantitative disclosures, including the amounts within the table, block tag for the narrative disclosures. FDTA, you heard enough about it, so I'll focus on what is relevant to the Commission. Among other requirements, we have to adopt data standards for reports filed under certain sections of the 1933 Act, 1934 Act, and 1940 Act. And part of those data standards must include a legal entity identifier that enables openness and machine readability of the public data. We're also required to establish a data quality improvement program. And finally, we have to report to Congress every 180 days on the use of machine readable data for the next 7 years. We have our work cut out for us. Our first report was issued in June 2023. So let's see what's in that report. It had a lot of information, including the benefits and costs of machine readable data, but I'm going to focus on how the Commission staff use the data because we often get this question. Do the SEC staff use the structured data? Absolutely. Do others use structured data? Absolutely. So how do we use this? Let's start with corporation finance staff. In case you're unaware, that's the group that oversees operating companies like Amazon. They have a direct relationship with the filer. They can review filings, issue comment letters, or contact them in a different way. They have used structured data to identify issuers that are subject to certain disclosure or submission requirements and possibly subject to trading prohibition. For example, under the Holding Foreign Companies Accountable Act, the filers are required to give us structured data on their auditor information. Who's their auditor? Where are they located? Until this year, PCAOB, that oversees the audit firms, could not inspect firms out in China. So there's a risk if your filer has an audit firm based out of China. Corporation finance and our division staff have reviewed structured data that appear on cover pages of certain periodic reports to count, sort, analyze the type of filers and their disclosures. For example, which filers are trading on what type of exchanges? Which of them are well-known seasoned issuers? Investment management staff. That group oversees investment management companies and advisors. They have used structured data to detect errors and inconsistencies within filings. Also, to identify funds with particular characteristics, disclosures, as well as funds with certain holdings and risk parameters. Office of the Chief Accountant. That group engages in accounting consultation, works with accounting standard bodies on standard settings. They have used outputs of our enterprise analytic applications to conduct research for accounting consultations, information gathering, relevant to accounting standards, and also to prepare responses to specific data requests regarding registrants' accounting practices. The report has other use cases as well, for example, how the enforcement staff use the data, so please take a look. It is publicly available on our site. In addition to all these activities, we develop analytic applications. One of them is called Filer Profile. You can think of it as a dashboard that our reviewers can take a look before they begin their review. It provides instant access to certain key data points, financial data points, audit-related information, and other information for operating companies. So before they dive into a large filing, which often are hundreds of pages, they can figure out what's going on with this filer or filing and where do I want to focus. Again, it highlights potentially high-risk data points and facilitates further analysis via links to data sources. We also review filings for data quality. One of the things that we publish on our website is called Data Quality Reminder. This is a short paragraph on a specific data quality issue we notice. For example, scaling error. There are filers with errors, scaling errors in public float, 3 extra zeros. A non-XLA filer with trillion in public float. Makes no sense. Incorrect use of outdated tags. A filer that adopted a new revenue recognition standard but still using an old tag from the old standard. Filers that tag liability with revenue tags. You don't need to be a CPA to know that's wrong. And when we see issues like this, it raises a question. What else could be wrong with this filer? What is their financial reporting process? Do they have a deficiency in their process? Are people tagging the data? Do they have accounting knowledge? You may also be aware of custom tag analysis we issue every year, one for GAAP filers, one for IFRS filers. And in case you're not aware, custom tags are allowed under interactive data rules, but it's very clear on when you can do it. It's only if your disclosures or transactions are very unique and you cannot find a standard tag. Just to give you some context, in the GAAP taxonomy, there are over 20,000 tags. In the IFRS taxonomy, there are over 5,000 tags. So when we see a filer that has a custom tag for property, plant, and equipment, things like printers and phones, we wonder why. Why did you create a custom tag for this? You may also be aware of our Division of Corporation Finance issuing comment letters on specific data quality to filers. And as you know, the comment letters are public on EDGAR website. Some of their topics include when filers did not give us XBRL data at all, or they didn't tag amounts in the footnotes. In September of this year, CorFin also issued a sample letter on XBRL topics. This was just a quick heads up to the filers and vendors and others on, you may get this letter with this topic. And some of them included when filers didn't give them inline XBRL, when they did not give us tag data for some of the new rules such as pay versus performance. One of the most effective ways to tackle data quality is to add validation checks at the intake place. As you may know, our filers use EDGAR, Electronic Data Gathering Analysis Retrieval System. There are 2 types of checks we do, validation errors. Filers have to fix this before they can submit. An example of that would be if a filing doesn't have a current fiscal year end. Very easy to fix. The second type is warnings. This lets the filers know there's something inconsistent, misleading, or ambiguous about their filing. For example, if they use an old tag, a deprecated tag. Some of the lessons learned, I know we're going to have a Q&A on this later, but I'll kind of start with the major, which is as you interact with folks within your agency, it's important to engage with your rulemaking, the policy staff, but also with the data users, as Rob mentioned earlier. You might have to kind of play the middle person, trying to get them to understand each other. So when they're working on a rulemaking, how is a data user going to use the data that's going to come out of this? What are some of the checks that you want to include? And vice versa, for the technology folks and the data folks, why are the attorneys or accountants kind of stuck on this one idea? And why are they concerned about the wording of the rules? We also want to remind everyone that extensions are very hard to consume. So this goes to, this is a kind of a collective effort, right? So extensions are really hard to consume because they lack context or relationships. So when we see extensions, there may be a good reason. Maybe the standard taxonomy needs to be updated based on common reporting practices. That's why it's good to do kind of a look back analysis after a new accounting standard is out. FASB certainly does that. ISB does it as well. And as we build our own taxonomies, we'll do the same. Also making the as reported data easily accessible. That way the filers, tagging vendors, or other data users don't have to guess how is this data mapped? Because it's just as reported. It should agree to what is submitted in EDGAR. Also, lastly, reminding everyone data quality matters. All this data is great, but if it's not of high quality data, it's not as useful. And engaging with different stakeholders, not just within the building, but outside. XBRL US, XBRL International, accounting standard bodies, tagging vendors, about the issues that they see, about other types of validations or data quality checks that they see as useful is really great. And I will end my presentation with the financial statements notes data set. We do have October data set up. now, and this is one of the most heavily downloaded sets on our website, not just OSD, but SEC's website. So please check it out. Easy way to remember our website is xbrl.sec.gov. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Julie. On to you, Mark.
Hello, everybody. Well, John gets right in. It's great going last because I can kind of gear my presentation to what they were talking about. So it's all good. But I want to give you some background on, I know you're going to read my PD, right? But so I want to give you some background on me. So for the last 20 years, I've been working in FDIC's Insurance and Research Division, which was a bit kind of the business side. And when I started there, I started working on the Federal Financial Institution Examination Council Central Data Repository. It was an interagency effort to collect the call report, use XBRL to collect the call report. And after that, I actually left for a little bit to go work at the Financial Accounting Foundation, where I worked on the US GAAP taxonomy version 1 and moved into version 2. The bottom fell out, right? 2008, great financial crisis happened, and came back to FDIC, and we all know what happened there. It was crazy times, right? And then after that, after the bottom fell out, I started working on something called the Legal Entity Identifier that everybody knows about. It's an interagency effort to come out with some kind of identifier for systemic risk. And then I did a little dabble in the blockchain and cryptocurrency network piece, but it's a story for another time, right? That was kind of fun for a while. And then just recently in 2023, I went to go work at the Chief Data Office within the FDIC, where I'm working on data strategy and data governance. So not just toot my own horn, it leads up to something, right? So I want to give you some background. A lot of people have heard this already, but some people haven't. So the Financial Institution Examination Council, CDR, the Central Data Repository, uses XBRL. As John said, it started a long time ago, and it actually started in 2001, the research did. So from 2001 to 2005, it was heavy development. And in 2005, went live, started collecting it. There's some hiccups at first, but there's a lot of work, almost like 4 years of development just to get to that point. But there's some key points within this system that how we use XBRL. So we encapsulate a lot of the FDIC business processes in it. So XBRL is used at these various levels, defines business definitions, right? Defines the business rules that FDIC uses and the banks. It also has the definitions are available for the banks, so we do data exchange with it, not just definitions and defining it, but we also exchange it and share it with the public and the banks. And then we use XBRL formula very heavily. We validate the information, very similar to, I believe, what FERC and SEC are doing. We actually validate it before the information comes in, so it's at the bank level. So the bank is actually in charge of their data. And if it comes up to our system, it gets validated a second time. So we call it the data gets much more cleaner by the time it comes to the analyst. And then we also provide the platform for development and analysis. Once that information comes in, there's a whole platform for development and analysis. They maintain the taxonomy, they publish a taxonomy, they test it out, they send it out to software vendors and banks, and when the information comes in, they do the analysis within the system. And then finally, we publish this information out, not just in XBRL, but also PDF, XBRL documents, and also inline XBRL for our bank examiners. Like I said, it was heavy development for 4 years. There were some hiccups. But there was a key here because we weren't just working just with FDIC, we were working with the other agencies, Federal Reserve Board and Office of the Comptroller of Currency. So there was an independent vendor that we had actually developed the system, but it was a collaboration to come up with the business processes. And I like to say a lot of times it is 80% business agreements, MOUs, and 20% technology, right? Because a lot of those agreements need to happen up front before you get to the final stage. And as I mentioned, it was published or it went into production in 2005. And yeah, we were happy. A lot of people were happy. Everybody was watching it. And this, again, from a history standpoint, we were working on XBRL, I think it was 1.0 in 2001. Then it went to 1.2.
2.0.
And then 2.0, yeah. So there's a lot of changes in between. And the great thing about it, this community, this XBRL community that you have in here, there's a lot of individuals in here, John and Campbell, XBRL International and US, they're willing to share experiences like this and work together. Without the community, we would not have progressed further than we had in 2005. So it's a great community to talk to. And like why we're up here is don't recreate the wheel. There's a lot of issues that we discovered, right? And if you guys are going to start implementing XBRL, yeah, you don't want to do the same things we did. Waste a lot of money. We wasted all the money for you. So next, FDIC uses XBRL formula, XBRL dimensions, and inline XBRL. So, and the XBRL actually influences what I call data health, which is essentially data quality, right? It affects the data health of FDIC business processes. And here's the examples of the XBRL that we use for these particular collections. I don't know if anybody is familiar with the financial call report. It's a financial report we collect from all the financial institutions in the U.S., some of them with foreign offices, domestic and foreign offices. And geez, when the project first went live, it was about 8,100 banks. Now, fortunately, it's about 4,700 banks because they're just merging out of existence. It's just the nature of the business that we're in now. The world's changing. So the call report, we use heavily used formula, as I said, and we use the call report for bank trends, bank examinations, risk models, and insurance premiums. And this is across the divisions within FDIC. There's multiple divisions, and each of the divisions, with the call report, they do a lot of various analysis with it. The second report is a summary of deposits, where we use XBRL dimensions. And again, same thing across the FDIC divisions. They use it for bank trends, bank mergers, bank resolution planning. It's really big, and also consumer finance. And I'm not going to get into too much detail, the details of that, but you can see as the information comes in, it becomes more. It's cleaner. It's more. It's structured, so they can do better analysis within their own financial models. And then finally, this is interesting. Once we collect the call report information, we actually created a system called the Examiner Toolkit Suite, and we use inline XBRL for that. So when the bank examiner was examining a bank, a lot of times before we created this system, the data was about 60 to 90 days old. So when they went to go do a bank examination, a lot of times they had old data when they're actually examining the bank. When we implemented this Examiner Toolkit Suite to pull data using web services from the Central Data Repository that collects the XBRL data, they get it immediately. They log in at the bank, they pull down the data, they have it in an immediate format using inline XBRL. And they also have something called the Uniform Bank Performance Report, which I did not put up here, but it's an inline XBRL also. It's a peer group report that the examiners use to look at the bank data during an examination. And like I said, it's on demand when they actually go to the bank. The data is readily available now. They're happy with that too, instead of actually pulling down older data. And our data sets are used by other federal regulatory agencies, state regulatory agencies, and a lot of times universities actually pull down our information. One thing that's not in XBRL, we have a failed bank data set that we're doing a lot of analysis on, and hopefully that can be public someday. But it takes, from a historical standpoint, from a university, you can actually use that information and teach your class about, look at all this. This is cool. It's cool. Well, now the bottom's falling out, and do your reports on that and talk about Lehman's. I think someone brought up Lehman's, but yeah, it's a pretty interesting data set. Okay, so yeah, in my title too, it says then, before, and now once more. You can actually see why I mean that, because I did it way back when. Now we're getting back into it with FDTA. So this is a key slide here. So the XBRL call report taxonomy was an interagency effort. And John mentioned this. For the Central Data Repository, we had a change manager. It is change because it's changing the way processes, the way the business is doing work, but also how you're going to work with the industry and also the banks. So there's a whole change management process we had with this. So the second one was the legal entity identifier. And again, there's a whole presentation on how that came about. But again, it was working with multiple agencies to come up with this legal entity identifier and the change management within each of the agencies and how we're going to use this. And then the story. I think Goliath is here. The story of how that went to FASB and then it went off into the G20 and all that. Now it's a standard. It's an ISO standard. Right? Next is the Financial Data Transparency Act. As Julie said, that's big on our radar now, but the key is the agencies are collaboratively working together to work on this joint rule. So there's collaboration and discussion again from that. And again, working across agencies, even within one agency is hard, but working across agencies is much harder. But getting people to talk, build that relationship, understanding where we're at and where we're going have an agreement and moving forward is a big deal. Even when you're, again, from an XBRL standpoint, it's a big deal. It's all business, and eventually it gets down to the technology. And also we're doing a technical analysis. So you have the joint rulemaking, but you also have the individuals working from a technical standpoint on the various aspects of the rule that, result from a technical aspect. And then we're also working on climate data. And again, it's interagency collaboration. There's a lot of discussion. There's a collaboration at that level. And then there's a whole metadata analysis. So there's collaboration, how we get this information in, and then looking at the data and the metadata, making sure it's clean. So it's a whole big project from that standpoint. But as you can see, it's discussions and use cases, right? So you have sort of the theory. Everybody's kind of talking about what are we going to do? How are we going to move forward? Good planning, right? And then you get down to the practical. You get down to the collaboration and implementation, right? So at the theory level, again, that's why we're here. We're talking about this and how's it going to work? How's it going to be applied to my business? How are we going to actually then, after we make a decision on it, how are we going to implement it? And that's the whole point of these workshops and collaboration and discussion. How are you going to implement it? Because you're going to be responsible after a while, but you're not going to be able to do it alone because we're all here doing the same thing. Let's see, next one. So bringing it back, my slides are almost over, so you guys don't have to leave yet. Right? I'm just joking. You guys can leave if you want. FDIC is working on a data strategy. So as I said, I started working in the Chief Data Office. FDIC, after the whole Federal Data Act, each of the federal agencies needed to have a Chief Data Office. I recently moved there. FDIC is working on a data strategy. We reviewed a lot of other data strategies, including the SEC's, which is very well done. And we're coming up with our own. And again, we reviewed other ones. We work on an internal draft. But where I'm getting to here is that FDIC is also working on a data standard strategy, right? So working on a data standard strategy is trying to establish definitions, having a common data set of what's a data standard, right? It can be anything, right? It can be from a phone to something else. So in the standards data strategy, you want to talk about financial data standards. XBRL is one of them. You talk about digital assets, ERC 720 and ERC 20. It's a digital asset, a token. So there's a lot of different data standards out there. So we're working on that. And the same thing we're going to do with this is we're doing research and analysis, coming up with some definitions. But we actually want to share that with the other agencies, other federal agencies that will actually want to do it, or even state agencies, talking about here's our data standard strategy that covers a lot of our data standards. And how can we actually work together and share, maybe we're missing a data standard that we don't know about, but the best thing to do is get together and talk about it. So we're working on that. That's coming down the road. And the last one is, and maybe everybody in the room knows this, is the need for a data strategy, right? Data standard strategy. The key is interoperability and reuse, right? Once you come up with XBRL or a common standard, why are you doing it? Maybe you do have to follow this FDTA law, but why are you using XBRL? The whole point is interoperability and reuse. You don't want to recreate the wheel. If there is a taxonomy out there, then maybe FDIC has it, SEC or FERC. You can use it, extend it, create your own. But the whole point is interoperability and data reuse, right, to make it easier across. And I don't think anybody's mentioned it, but structured data is very important for AI and machine learning, right? So you need that information in order to start using your models, train your models correctly. So that's very important. And again, need for a data standard strategy is FDTA. We're working on that. And climate data. I don't know if anybody's looking at climate data. I know FERC may be, FERC is here. But I know they're obviously working on climate data, but it's very important from that aspect to having some kind of structured information and data strategy. Cool. Thank you.
Mark, thank you very, very much. I hope that everybody took away from these great leaders' presentations the one theme that really unites this, and I would argue you could see this in every single data collection function anywhere in the world. Collaboration is key. Everything else takes a step back and is not nearly as important as that. And I think we saw the importance of that in the presentations from each and every one of our presenters. So thank you very much. We've got some pre-prepared questions, which I'm going to skip because the questions from the audience are way better. So we will jump into this one. There's one here for you, Mark. How your taxonomy used for call reporting, does it accept extensions Or didn't you bother with those things?
It does not. It does not accept extensions. The call reports, again, the implementation is a little bit different from SEC. The call report, or they're very structured information. Yeah, let me go way back, right? So everything started as a balance sheet income statement, right? And when the call reports were first coming in, there's balance sheet income statements, and there's some, some notes, right? Some footnotes. Those footnotes became much bigger, kind of like the SEC has a lot of footnotes. Eventually, we understand patterns in those footnotes and created subschedules, right? So you have balance sheet income statement. Now you have capital risk markets, risk schedules. You have capital market information and some others. Well, the bottom line is that those notes eventually became subschedules. I'm getting
Excellent.
tongue-tied.
Thank
here.
you.
Sorry.
Julie, one for you. How long did it take for the SEC to develop those 20,000 tags?
So we actually work with FASB taxonomy team. So that's we have an arrangement with them where they develop it and we monitor. We meet with them weekly on developing it. So
Call that to Lewis Mathern, who's somewhere.
he's right there, so he might know. But it took several years. When it was first developed, I believe I was still in school, but but it's a really good model. I think that it even also has a viewer, right? So it's really easy for newcomers to see kind of the tree, how does all these line items roll up, and then the disclosures. And Lewis's team does a really great job. So, Lewis, did you want to talk about how many years it took, in case anyone's
Look at
really
Lewis's grey hair. I knew him when that wasn't there. A little aside on that, there's some really interesting work going on in different parts of the world at the moment on utilizing AI to accelerate the creation of taxonomies. Because after all, what they're trying to do is represent a standard, like the Gatsby standards say, and represent them as taxonomies. So some of that work will get accelerated. Quality, collaboration remain key. Rob, how many FERC filers are there, and how many filings are done per year? And is there any data on the incremental costs to FERC filers?
So for these forms, there's probably around 600 different companies filing these forms, but that's across industry. Some companies would file both electric and gas and oil. Some may file all of them. They file. What was the rest of the question? How often do they file?
How often? Yeah.
So they're quarterly filing. So there's a Q1, Q2, Q3, and then there's an annual. There's also a separate form that's very specific to the electric industry. It's just an annual form. And so, they come in usually a month after the quarter deadline. And what was the last part?
Costs, incremental
Oh,
costs.
we are not far out enough from our implementation to really have done an assessment of the implemental cost to the filers yet. So we will be doing more of that in some white papers and things like that we are currently working on.
There's actually another related question on that I'll come to in a second, but can we just go back to your point about the farmer with a wind turbine in their field?
Yeah.
Obviously, there's a difference between that person and a massive publicly listed company, which has every incentive to re-engineer their data aggregation and external reporting function to digitize that at the same time as they're asked to publish stuff in digital fashion. It enhances controls, it improves the quality of the process, and it creates digital collaboration across a large enterprise. But none of that's relevant to the farmer, because the last thing that he or she wants to do is file something to FERC. So how do you think that might work?
So the process we've outlined we did a little bit of that with the current eForms implementation, and we talked to a lot of the smaller filers, but each one of these companies, they're multi-million-dollar companies that file the current collection. The new collection, the Electric Quarterly Reports update that we published last month, does include it does include that farmer, and it does include Exelon, and it does include everybody in between. I'd say 70 to 80% of our filers are small filers. They may be filing maybe 300 rows of data, and so we have to create, and what we've called it is we're creating templates to file. We haven't figured out, because we're not in the development process yet, ways for that farmer to file if you meet a certain criteria. If you're filing in only one of the organized markets, if that's where all of your trades are doing. So electricity is about, the trades are separated into 6 organized markets, 6 NASDAQs and New York Stock Exchanges across the United States. They all use different products, different names for the same products. And they all have to file into the EQR. We're going to be working with those organized markets to create like a crosswalk as to how those settlement data can come in the door. And then of course we're going to have the system completely open. So if the big companies that are filing gigabyte files at a time of millions upon millions of rows of sales data, they can file as complicated of a report as they want. So it is essential to serve both interests, and it's going to be difficult.
But you're not the only one that's faced that. And there was a question about that plumber that I referenced at the beginning. How much does it cost the plumber? And do they fill in a template, or do they do something else? So this is a really typical process in many European countries and many Asian countries for very, very small companies, literally a plumber, to have to do these filings. And they create inline XBRL documents, but they're financial statements. So what do? Well, let's face it, they have an accountant, and the accountant has an accounts production package. It's a tool that they used to use to spit out a PDF, and for 10 years, those companies were forced, if they wanted to stay in that game, to spit out an inline XBRL document, which looks like a PDF, but is actually, as Mark was saying, an HTML document with some extra tags in it. So that plumber pays absolutely nothing more. Market forces have pushed that price to 0 because they give it to the accountant produces the accounts, they review the accounts, that goes to the tax man, and indeed it goes to the business registrar. So there are different approaches. Some countries ask for templates. Here's a template, it's a web page, or it's an Excel document, fill it in. Others do this kind of mechanism to say, well, it's a financial statement, you can do anything you like, but you're going to get some software, and that will range from 0 to, street price for these filings in India are incredibly low, like just astonishingly low, but they're not 0, through to a few $100 for relatively complicated sets of accounts in certain parts of Europe. So it's very variable on, in part, the carrots and sticks that are being defined by the regulators, and ways that they're asking software vendors to get involved in this process. It is true that for larger entities, there is a massive advantage to really modernizing the way that their reporting works, as we heard earlier about Columbus. So a question now, and I think this is the last question, is probably back to you, well, in fact, to the entire panel, in terms of lessons learned. Have you had state regulators come to you learn about your XBRL implementations? And if so, what have their common concerns been? Suddenly worrying this might be a short answer.
Yeah. So we've had state regulators come and talk with us, and they're really concerned about their data quality or data health, right? They're looking at how we use formulas to validate the information. So that's the.
Anyone want to add anything to that? You tend to talk a lot. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so we many of the state regulators, many of the PSCs within the state use the Form 1 data, specifically the electric data. They ask for that to also be submitted. We did a lot of outreach to organizations that help with states and the regulations, and we haven't actually had conversations with them about these forms, how to take in this data, things like that. But it would be, just as Mark mentioned, it's just copying the taxonomy if they want to have the same thing submitted to them, or taking the data directly from us, or building on top of it extensions, extended taxonomies if they want more detailed information. But we haven't had those conversations yet. We are open to them at any time.
Thank you. Did you want to add anything, Julie?
We have a separate office that has a relationship with the state folks, and I think just based on our limited interaction with so far is is what you would expect with any change. I think it's kind of the unknown, so people are a little afraid, thinking about what does this mean for me, and what is XBRL, how is this going to be useful. So we'll do our best to work with various groups to kind of convince the why, right? Why should you care about structured data? How is it going to help you? What's in it for you? What are your pain points, and how can this immutable data helpful to you, but also others as well?
Thank you very much, Julie. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you've learned a bit from our panel that has been describing some of the really leading edge data collection functions that are using XBRL in the United States. Hopefully that provides you some food for thought as you get down this path in your own environments, remembering the importance of collaboration, the importance of reuse, and the importance of interoperability. Please join me in thanking our panel, Rob, Julie, and Mark.